When we think of growing older, it's often depicted as a well-earned period of rest and enjoyment, a time to savor the fruits of decades of hard work. We envision leisurely mornings, relaxed afternoons with loved ones, and finally having the time to indulge in simple pleasures. But for many, the reality of aging doesn't match these rosy expectations. For Jack Thompson, a 62-year-old man who had meticulously planned for his retirement, the dream of a peaceful, fulfilling future began to unravel. Instead of the ease and comfort he anticipated, early retirement sparked a wave of uncertainty and loneliness. What followed was a journey of self-discovery, revealing the challenges many seniors face but seldom discuss. The loss of a life partner. The first blow came several years ago with the loss of Sarah, his beloved wife. Sarah had been the cornerstone of Jack's life for more than 35 years. They had built a life together, raised 2 children, and created a home filled with memories. Her passing, after a prolonged illness, left Jack reeling. The loss was not just of a partner, but of a shared life, of the dreams they had yet to fulfill, and the quiet moments they had taken for granted. The empty space left in the house was impossible to fill. Jack often found himself drifting from room to room, the absence of Sarah's voice, her laughter, and the shared rituals of their life together creating a silence that felt suffocating. At times, he would find himself standing in the kitchen, half expecting to hear her footsteps behind him, or in the living room, imagining her sitting in her favorite chair reading her book. But she was gone, and the house felt like a shell of its former self. The grief of losing Sarah was deep and enduring, and though time had passed, the ache in Jack's heart never fully subsided. The growing silence of an empty house. After Sarah's death, the silence in Jack's home became a constant companion. His children, Adam and Emily, had their own lives to live. Adam, his son, was married with children, and Emily, his daughter, was busy with her career and family. Jack's once bustling home now felt empty, even when his children visited. Their brief stops for a quick meal or a catch-up conversation no longer filled the void he felt inside. The house, once the heart of his family, seemed to grow colder with each passing day. At first, Jack tried to distract himself by focusing on his retirement. He took up gardening, began working on projects around the house, and occasionally met with friends for coffee. But these activities, while enjoyable at times, could not replace the profound sense of loss he felt each day. The emptiness was not just physical, but emotional. He longed for the sound of his children's voices, the warmth of a shared family dinner, or even the simple presence of someone in the house, moving around with purpose. A moment of reckoning, the phone call from Adam one afternoon. As Jack sat on the sofa, his mind wandering through memories, the phone rang. It was Adam, his son. Jack knew that Adam had a demanding job and a family of his own, so he tried to be understanding when the conversation started with a hurried tone. "Dad, are you staying home tonight?" Adam asked, his voice tinged with a sense of urgency. "There's some urgent work, and I might not be able to come by." Jack felt a pang of disappointment in his chest, but he tried to suppress it. He didn't want to burden his son with his loneliness. "It's fine, Adam, don't worry about me," Jack replied, his voice betraying none of the emptiness he felt inside. He hung up, the absence of Adam's voice on the other end of the line leaving a hollow ache in his heart. The silence that followed seemed even more oppressive, as if the world had moved on without him. Jack understood, of course. Adam had responsibilities, a family, and his own life to live. But the reality of being left behind, of feeling like an afterthought in the lives of his children, was a hard pill to swallow. For all the sacrifices he had made throughout his life, there he was, sitting alone in the quiet of his home, grappling with the painful awareness that his role as a father and as an integral part of his family had diminished. The visit from John. The conversation about loneliness. A few days later, Jack's neighbor John stopped by for a visit. John was around Jack's age, and the two had shared countless conversations over the years, talking about everything from politics to gardening to the ups and downs of family life. But this time there was a heaviness in the air, an unspoken understanding that both men were facing the same challenge: aging alone. John sat down beside Jack, and after a few moments of silence, he sighed deeply. "So, it's just you here now, huh?" John asked, his voice soft but heavy with meaning. Jack nodded, feeling the weight of the words settle over him. It wasn't just the physical emptiness of the house that was suffocating. It was the emotional isolation that seemed to grow stronger each day. John, too, was feeling the same loneliness. His wife was busy with her own activities, and his children, like Jack's, were leading their own lives. The conversation soon turned to the future, and John, speaking from his own experience, posed a question that hit Jack hard. What if one day you're all alone? It was a simple question, but it felt like a gut punch. The thought of being entirely alone with no one to check on him, no one to share a meal with or to talk about the day's events, was a terrifying prospect. Jack had spent so many years focused on providing for his family and maintaining his own independence that he hadn't fully considered the possibility of being left to navigate his later years in isolation. Emily's visit, a heartbreaking reality. A few days after his conversation with John, Jack's daughter Emily stopped by with her son Noah. She had brought some of Noah's favorite childhood dishes, hoping that the familiar flavors would prompt a longer visit. But as soon as Emily stepped through the door, she was quick to explain that she had to leave shortly to take care of some errands. Her hurried tone and the worried look on Noah's face made Jack's heart ache. Emily barely had time to sit down before she was up again, rushing to tend to her obligations. Jack tried to smile, trying to hide the ache in his chest. "Go ahead. Take care of what you need to do. I'm fine here," he said, though the words felt empty as soon as they left his lips. He watched them leave, the sound of their footsteps slowly fading away. The house felt even emptier now, the silence more oppressive than before. The brief visit, while appreciated, only served to highlight how distant he had become from the life he had once known. That night, as Jack lay in bed, the silence in the house was deafening. His mind replayed the conversation with John and Emily's brief visit. The question that had haunted him earlier in the week resurfaced with painful clarity. What should I do if I'm left alone? The weight of solitude. A wake-up call. Medical expenses, emergencies, and the unknowns of life seemed to always emerge at the most inconvenient times. This relentless cycle of surprise challenges had become a part of my everyday reality. I wasn't alone in this. John, my old friend, had been facing the same struggles. His voice echoed in my mind as I reflected on the difficulty of it all. With no spouse, no children nearby, and no immediate family to count on, it was up to us to care for ourselves. Those words rang true and carried a weight I couldn't ignore. It was a hard truth, but it was the reality that we both had to face as the years unfolded. At first, I felt a knot of sadness twist within me. How had I come to this point? But in that moment, another feeling stirred within me. Determination. I wasn't ready to let this be the final chapter of my life. Maybe, just maybe, I could still turn things around and find a way to live out my later years with dignity, a sense of purpose, and, dare I hope, some peace. But to do so, I knew I had to act, and the time was now. I glanced around the empty room, the silence almost deafening, and it made me realize something crucial. Loneliness, if left unchecked, would devour me. But instead of letting the silence overwhelm me, I vowed that I would not wait any longer. I had to build a plan, step by step, to regain control of my life and ensure that I wasn't living only in the shadows of memories and regrets. The silent struggle. Living alone brought with it a set of challenges that no one ever quite prepares for, especially as you get older. Despite the love and care my children showered upon me from afar, there were times when I desperately needed someone who could physically be there when things went wrong. That was a hard truth to swallow. It wasn't that I didn't appreciate the efforts of my children, but they were busy with their own lives, their own families. It was difficult to ask for help when I knew they had their own burdens to bear. The realization hit me like a cold gust of wind on an otherwise warm day. As much as I loved them and as much as they loved me, I had to become more independent. It was essential, or I would lose myself to the slow creep of isolation. John's words echoed in my mind, the wisdom of experience evident in his tone. We have to take care of ourselves. It felt like a wake-up call. For so many years, I had poured every ounce of energy into caring for my children, putting their needs before my own. The sacrifices I had believed were worth it. But somewhere along the way, I had neglected my own happiness, my own well-being. The years had slipped by in a blur, and now I found myself sitting in a house that no longer felt like a home, but rather a prison built of silence and memories. My life had become a routine, one dictated by the unchanging tick of the clock and the hum of the television in the background. A slow, quiet decline. As much as I tried to convince myself that I was content, deep down I knew it wasn't true. The isolation was suffocating. I felt like I was existing, not living. I wasn't sure when the change had started, but it had become harder and harder to ignore the truth. My health, my happiness, everything that made life worth living depended on me changing. It was too easy to slip into the comfort of routine. Getting out of bed, making the same cup of coffee, watching the same shows day after day. It was easier than facing the unknowns of change. But I knew if I continued down this path, it would lead only to a slow and steady decline. And so, I made the decision to change, even if it felt daunting at first. Every journey begins with a single step, and that's how I approached it. The first day, I forced myself to get out and walk to the park. A simple walk, no more than a mile or so. But it was something. It was a start, and it felt good to move my body again. The fresh air, the sound of the wind rustling through the leaves, even the chirping of birds. Those small things began to reignite something in me. I wasn't just a person sitting in front of the television anymore. I was someone who was actively taking steps to reclaim their life. That was only the beginning. In the evenings, I ventured to the community center, hesitant at first. It felt strange to be around people after so many years of solitude. I started by playing chess, something I hadn't done in years, and it felt awkward, as if I was an outsider trying to fit in. The loneliness weighed heavily on me at times, pulling me back into my shell. But gradually I began to form connections with others. There were other seniors like me, people who understood the challenges of growing older alone. Slowly, I built new friendships, each one adding something meaningful to my life. The underlying fear of loneliness. Despite the new activities and new friends, something was missing. Each night as I lay in bed staring up at the ceiling, the same question haunted me. Who will be there for me when I get sick? The question was simple, but it struck at the very core of my fears. No matter how much I tried to distract myself with good intentions or new routines, the reality of facing old age alone remained. What would happen when I needed someone to talk to, someone to help me through the hard times? The silence in the room seemed to amplify my fears. It became louder and louder the more I thought about it, and the more unsettled I became. At first, I had been content to live alone. It had been a quiet choice after Sarah's passing. I didn't want to burden anyone, and I had convinced myself that I could manage on my own. But now, something had shifted. The thought of having someone by my side wasn't about needing help. It was simply about companionship. I needed someone who could share the quiet moments with me, someone who understood what it was like to age alone. But then guilt came rushing in. Sarah had only passed recently, and the idea of moving on felt like a betrayal of her memory. How could I possibly let go of her presence? How could I welcome someone else into my life when I still carried her in my heart? The guilt was suffocating, but at the same time, the loneliness within me grew more intense. I had to confront it, whether I wanted to or not. A conversation with an old friend. After much hesitation, I found the courage to talk to John, my old friend, about the feelings I had been wrestling with. We had always been there for each other, but this was a new kind of conversation, one that required vulnerability I wasn't sure I had left. John listened to me quietly, his expression knowing. His silence spoke volumes, but when he finally spoke, his words were filled with the compassion and understanding only someone who had walked a similar path could offer. "I get it," he said softly. His voice was rich with empathy, and his words seemed to ease some of the weight pressing on my chest. After my wife passed, I felt the same way. We don't need someone to depend on, but we need someone to talk to, someone to share the highs and lows with. It's not about replacing them, but about finding a connection. You need someone to support you just as you would for them. His words rang true in a way that I hadn't expected. I wasn't looking for someone to replace Sarah. I just needed companionship. I needed someone to ease the ache of solitude that had settled in my bones. Slowly, I began to open my heart to the possibility of finding a companion again, someone who could bring light into the quiet spaces of my life. A new companion, Margaret. That's when I met Margaret. She was an elderly woman who also lived alone, her family far away, much like mine. We quickly bonded over our shared experiences of loneliness and the challenges of living far from our children. Margaret's vibrant, optimistic personality was like a breath of fresh air, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something stir inside me. Hope. Margaret had a zest for life that reminded me of the things I had been missing. She was always exploring, visiting new places, and finding joy in the little things. Being around her reignited a spark in me, and I found myself looking forward to our conversations and time together. As time went on, our relationship deepened. We began to do more together, grocery shopping, cooking meals, taking walks in the park, and simply enjoying each other's company. We never really labeled our connection, and that was okay. There was no need to. What we shared was enough. Our companionship filled the empty spaces in my home and in my heart, and the house, which had once felt so lifeless, now felt warm and inviting. The true meaning of companionship. One night, when I fell ill with a fever, I was reminded just how much having someone by your side can mean. Margaret was immediately there, her concern for me palpable in every gesture. She rushed to get me medicine, applied a damp cloth to my forehead, and stayed by my side, making sure I was comfortable. Her presence gave me a sense of peace that I hadn't realized I needed. When my son Adam arrived to take me to the hospital, he was surprised to see Margaret there, so diligently taking care of me. His worry for me was clear, but I reassured him, smiling faintly. "I didn't want to worry you," I said, "but Margaret takes excellent care of me." Adam, though torn, seemed grateful for her care and insisted on taking me to the doctor. The fever wasn't serious, but the simple act of being cared for meant more than I could ever put into words. That night, as I lay in bed recovering, I watched Margaret quietly take care of everything. The house was no longer just a place I existed in. It had become a home, full of love, tenderness, and the quiet rhythm of two lives intertwined. The emptiness that had once defined my existence had been replaced with something far more meaningful: companionship, shared moments, and the quiet comfort of someone who cared. The struggle with loneliness. I found myself grappling with the harsh reality that many elderly people must face: solitude. I had always been independent, even after Sarah's passing, but living alone was a different kind of challenge. In those quiet moments, I began to realize how much I had relied on Margaret's presence. It was not just the physical companionship, but the emotional bond that had filled the gap left by my wife's passing. Now, with her gone, the loneliness crept in, uninvited but persistent. The morning routine, which once seemed so simple, now felt hollow. I still woke up early, I still exercised, and I still met with old friends at the community center, but each day felt longer, each interaction more superficial, as if I were just going through the motions. I could hear the concern in Adam and Emily's voices during our phone calls, their voices thick with worry about how I was adjusting. Their lives were full, they had their own families to care for, and as much as I appreciated their concern, I didn't want to be a burden to them. They had their own challenges, their own responsibilities, and I knew deep down that they could never fully understand the void that had opened inside me. Despite their best efforts, I could sense the distance between us, the unspoken truth that my children had their lives, their routines, and I was just a background part of it. They tried to reassure me that they would always be there for me, but the silence in my heart spoke louder than their words. I didn't want them to feel obligated to take care of me, to constantly worry about my well-being. So I reassured them, perhaps too often, that I was fine, that I had everything under control. But inside, the loneliness grew, sinking deeper with every passing day. The conversation that changed everything. One afternoon, I found myself sitting at the community center, surrounded by familiar faces, yet feeling more isolated than ever. The chatter around me was a blur, a faint hum in the background as I sank into my own thoughts. That's when I overheard a conversation that would change the course of my life. A group of people was discussing the possibility of moving into a nursing home, sharing their experiences and fears. The idea struck me like a bolt of lightning. The sudden realization that perhaps this was the solution to the crushing solitude I had been living with. I didn't know much about nursing homes, but the idea of living in a place where there were people around, a community of sorts, seemed like the only viable option. I couldn't continue living in this empty house, facing the quiet walls day after day. I needed companionship. I needed a place where I could find some semblance of connection, some purpose for the remaining years of my life. The more I thought about it, the more it made sense. The next day, I called Adam. As soon as he answered, I could hear the hesitation in his voice. I knew what he was going to say, that it wasn't a perfect solution, that a nursing home might feel cold, institutional. But I had already made up my mind. I needed this. I needed to stop feeling alone. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Finally, Adam spoke, his voice full of concern. "Dad, are you sure you want to move into a nursing home? Doesn't that place feel cold, like a place for the forgotten?" His words stung, and I knew he meant well, but I had to stay firm. "Adam," I said, my voice quiet but resolute, "it's not about the coldness. It's about finding a place where I can truly be at peace, where I can be around people and not feel so isolated. You and Emily have your own lives. I don't want to be a burden to you. At least in a nursing home, I won't be so alone." There was another pause, and I could feel the tension between us. Finally, Adam sighed. "Okay, Dad, if this is what you really want, we'll support you. We'll visit you often, I promise." The relief that washed over me in that moment was indescribable. I wasn't completely alone in this decision. They understood, even if they didn't fully agree. They respected my wishes, and that meant everything to me. A new chapter. A few months later, I moved into a nursing home in the suburbs. The place was beautiful, more like a peaceful retreat than an institution. It was surrounded by flower gardens, and there were plenty of activity rooms, games, and communal spaces. I took my time to adjust, exploring the grounds, taking walks around the yard, and meeting some of the other residents. On my first day, I met Mr. Robinson, a long-term resident who welcomed me with a warm smile and offered to show me around. His kindness made the transition a little easier, and I began to see the potential of this new chapter in my life. That first night, as I lay in my new bed gazing out the window at the night sky, I felt a strange sense of calm. This wasn't home, and it wasn't the life I had envisioned, but it was a new beginning. I had made a few new friends, and the prospect of companionship, however small, eased the weight of my loneliness. The days began to pass in a blur of routine. I ate regularly, exercised, and spent time socializing with my new friends. It wasn't perfect, but it was peaceful, and I found comfort in the rhythm of it. 6 months passed, and I settled into my new life. I played chess with friends, participated in group activities, and spent quiet afternoons reading in the garden. The fear of isolation that had haunted me for so long seemed to dissipate, replaced by a new sense of purpose. It wasn't the life I had imagined, but it was one I could live with. A new sense of peace. Life at the nursing home became a peaceful rhythm, filled with the simplicity of small pleasures. I no longer faced the crushing solitude I had once feared. Adam and Emily still called frequently, their voices full of concern about my adjustment to living alone. They seemed to worry endlessly, even though I assured them every time that I was doing well, that nothing was missing. "You don't need to worry about me," I would say. But deep down, I knew they couldn't fully understand the peace I had found in this new life. I had learned to embrace solitude, to appreciate it, and for the first time in years I felt grounded.